Welcome to Athens City Council. Tonight we're starting a little bit early. It's 6:04 p.m. and what we have is a public hearing for the downtown redevelopment districts. And with us presenting tonight, we have Mr. Nate Green, who will be offering some information to us. Council members and the mayor and the auditor have received a copy of the presentation that Mr. Green will be going through, as well as we also have a hard copy of this, and this is presented by the Montrose Group, LLC. And so we'll be learning more. It's a lot of information in the report, so we appreciate you being here tonight to fill us in and answer. I'm sure there will probably be some questions, but it's a fairly well documented piece, so thank you very much. And if you want to join us up at the podium and just before you start, just announce your name so we have that for the audience that's viewing and the group that you represent. Okay.
My name is Nate Green. I'm with the Montrose Group. We've worked with the Athens County Economic Development Council. And one of the things we're working on is to help all of you with these downtown redevelopment districts. And we've worked with the mayor, worked with several of the council members. We've talked to about this. But the purpose tonight is a public hearing for these downtown redevelopment districts. The downtown redevelopment districts, the public hearings, this is a part of the process to approve these downtown redevelopment districts. So you all will, I believe, see the legislation here in a couple of weeks. I think I can't remember. I can't remember the exact time, but you will see it here soon and just kind of talk through that. But this really is a discussion, just really to introduce it to the public, talk through the developments or the benefits, really what the downtown redevelopment districts are, why we're talking about them and really the reason for them. So with that, Mayor, I don't know if you wanted to say anything. We've been talking about this first. I don't know if you wanted to kick off anything. Sarah's not here tonight. She's ill, so she would normally be here, but I don't know if you had anything you wanted to.
Just real brief, and then you can roll right into your presentation. Sure. You know, downtown redevelopment districts does fall under the Ohio Revised Code. It is code section 5709-45 or .45, and they're really designed as a tool for communities to bring in capital investment for a defined area. They have to be 10 acre, not to exceed 10 acres. They can really be shaped in any way you want them to be shaped, to where you're capturing either redevelopable properties. There has to be a historic building or structure or facility within your 10-acre plat in having this roll forward. And the council, I know, is very familiar with the tax incremental financing, or TIFs. With a TIF, as you know, that money can only be used for city infrastructure, streets, and street utilities, whereas a DRD can be used for a lot more. It can be used to revitalize historic structures. It can be used to create loans. It can be used to create grants for redevelopment. Again, it's a lot less restrictive under the DRD, the downtown redevelopment tool, in comparison to a TIF. TIFs are valuable too. The city has one TIF, but currently the city has no downtown redevelopment districts. And so I think Nate's going to roll us into the three more specifics about the DRDs, downtown redevelopment districts, but then also hopefully you have some maps showing what the three DRDs or proposed DRDs, what they look like.
We do, and I think at some point we'll pull them up on the screen here. Maybe we can do that now. But so the mayor talked a little bit about this. You all have two things in front of you, or maybe you have one, but there is a 4-page document, or I guess it's 2 pages back to back, that really, and Ashley's passing them out to everybody in the audience. But this really is, it's the executive summary of the full plan. And I think what I'll do, rather than go from the full plan, because the full plan itself, I believe, is 30 pages long, and we'll be here long past your 7 o'clock meeting for CDBG. So I'll talk through this, and you know, I'll try to talk maybe for 10 or 15 minutes, and then just open it up to council members, and then if you open it up, I don't know if you open it up for public or not, but we'll open it up for questions as well. From there. So I'm going to speak from this smaller document, just so you know. So as the mayor talked about, the downtown redevelopment districts, these are historic preservation tools. The state of Ohio, the state legislature passed in September of 2016 these downtown redevelopment district, this tool. As the mayor said, they're fashioned off of tax increment finance districts. You have one out on State Street for the retail. You have a TIF out there that has generated a certain amount of revenues from new property taxes there that has gone back into infrastructure. The difference between that TIF and these downtown redevelopment districts is what I said kind of in the primer, is that these are for historic preservation. So a TIF you can really use for one thing. A TIF you can use the increase in property taxes for public infrastructure. And that's the only thing you can use it for under TIF law. The downtown redevelopment district, the difference between that is that you can also use the downtown redevelopment district, the revenues generated from it, for public infrastructure, but you can also use it for a few other things. You can use it to make loans to properties that are in the historic district that are not historic buildings. You can make grants to properties within the historic district that are either a National Register of Historic Place or they're in a National Register of Historic Place district. You can use part of the money to fund development organizations, special improvement districts, community improvement corporations, or other 501c3 nonprofits. And then also, if you have enough bandwidth, which you do because we have Ohio University here, you can use them to fund innovation districts, and then you can make loans to companies in that innovation district. So those are the uses of funds. The way that we get funds into the DRD is through an increase in property taxes. Again, like a TIF, you have that TIF in place now, but it's those 5 uses I talked about. The money from that is generated strictly from the increase in property taxes in that DRD. The DRD is a 10-acre area, so that increase in property taxes is in that 10 acres, and only the increase in that 10 acres can be used in that district. So we're going to talk about 3 DRDs, but we can't commingle funds. We can't take from one and put into another. We have to use that in that district. Another thing is that it's an increase in the property taxes in that 10-acre area, but only 70% of that increase can be used for those DRD purposes. The other 30% goes to the other entities that would already get the money, so school districts, developmental disabilities organizations, other levy agencies, transit agency, other levy agencies that you have that would receive property taxes, they would get that other 30%. So of 100% that's generated of new property taxes, 70% goes to the DRD, the other goes to the levy agencies that would receive it otherwise. These DRDs, it provides in the 10-acre area, it essentially makes those properties exempt from property tax, and then 70% of that is going back through what we call service payments. It's going back to the DRD for one of those 4 purposes. These are creatures of, as the mayor said, of statute. They're also creatures of municipalities. Only municipalities in the state of Ohio have the ability to do this. And so you not only have the ability to create it, you also determine where that revenue is going to go. It has to go into one of those 5 places I talked about, but every year you're going to get the money from your city auditor will get the money from the county treasurer. And then you along with the mayor and the city auditor and the law director will determine where those funds will go. The DRDs, the other thing I think that's important to note is that because these are historic preservation tools, they have to be anchored by an historic building or anchored within an historic district. We can't do a DRD unless it meets one of those criteria. It either has to have, in the district, it has to have a building that's on the National Register of Historic Places, or it has to be anchored in a National Register of Historic Places district. You have several buildings that are on the National Register. You also have a Court Street historic district that is on the National Register, and we'll talk about how those fit into this. So I think what I'll do, probably the best thing, if we could bring up the maps. There we go, right there. All right, so there's three of these DRDs we're going to talk about. Remember that these are 10-acre areas. They are continuous. They have a continuous boundary, meaning, and we'll see with the second one, meaning that we can use public right-of-way if we need to connect them. So if it were contiguous, they would all have to be beside each other. All the buildings would have to be beside each other. Continuous means that there has to be a continuous boundary, and that can include public right-of-way. So we'll talk about that. The first district we have up there, this is the 234 to Washington Street Downtown Redevelopment District. And I just want you to know, I named these downtown redevelopment districts, and we were talking with several council members and with the mayor and with Sarah. So if you want to change the names, we can certainly do that. The reason this one is named 234 Washington Street is because that is the historic building that's there. It's the Cider House. And so West End Cider House. So that is the historic building. On the map, it is property number 8. That might not be right.
That's correct.
It is.
It's property number 8. Yep, it's property number 8. Oh, I'm going to have to go back to my optometrist and get new glasses now. It's property number 8. As you see, it's property number 8. It also goes across the street. There's commercial buildings that are across the street there that are, they are historic. They're not on the National Register, but they're historic buildings. The big building that's on the corner there. We included in this. We went down Washington Street and included some buildings, and as you see, we included the roadway, and we included buildings that are on the south side of Washington Street that are commercial structures, or they may have housing in them today, but are commercial structures. The reason we did that is really that we hope that at some point those buildings would have activity there, have investment there, and we want to encourage that for the DRD. We also, the big parcels of property there, 16 and 17, those are owned, they are, as you know, Ohio University has facilities that are there. And they are exempt today from property tax, but the reason that we kept them in there is, one, there's potential that those could be something different within the next 10 years, and we wanted to have that as a investment tool. We also know that the university has in their West Union Street plan, those properties are part of it. So we wanted to make that a part of this. The goal of these DRDs is to encourage new investment in these areas and encourage people to make investments in these properties. So we want to use this as an economic development tool to encourage new investment. So that's why, that's kind of why it looks the way it does. The value here is probably some reinvestment in those buildings that are on Washington Street and then across the street from there. And then also the potential that could occur on the properties that Ohio University today either owns or they lease the properties from. So that's kind of our that one. And what I'll do, I'll go through all three of these, and then we can talk about them as I just talk about them after that. The next one that we'll talk about is the Sheltering Arms DRD. Again, I named this one, and it has nothing to do with the Sheltering Arms Hospital, which is up to the north of this, up near the school. The Sheltering Arms Foundation, as you probably know, owns the urgent care facility that's on Union Street there. That's why I named it Sheltering Arms. It's the biggest property that's in this area. This one is where the continuous boundary comes in. This starts at Union Street and Court Street, and is in those pieces of property are in the historic district. And then we go down Union Street, and then we pick up the Sheltering Arms Foundation and a lot of those properties on the south side. We had to have we had to have it anchored in a historic register place or in a district, and so that's why we anchored those like that. The potential here is really out by the hospital. We think that there's the shopping center, or not shopping center, there's the grocery store that's there, gas station. The township has a facility that's there, the urgent care that's there. We know that Ohio Health has made investments in their hospital. They will likely make more investments. We hope that they do. We want to encourage them to do that with this DRD. We also, we hope that because of the plans that Ohio University has announced, that we see some development out in that area. We want to encourage it and have the DRD in place to encourage it. We also, it's anchored at Court and Union, and certainly we want to encourage investment in those buildings as well. That is your historic downtown. You all know it. It's not that far from where we sit right now. But that we want to encourage those as well. So they might look, like they're far apart. But one, we had to make sure that it was anchored in an historic district. But also, we see some value in connecting the two, because we think there's serious value in what Union Street's going to become, what it's going to become. And I think connecting the two, connecting Court and Union with what's going on at the hospital, makes a lot of sense. The last proposed DRD is the Athens Depot DRD. This probably is named the most appropriately of all of them. It's anchored by the Athens Depot, which is, let's see, so that the Athens Depot is property number 14. This is, for all intents and purposes, these properties are connected to one another. They're very close to each other. A lot of these properties are owned by Ohio University today. I think there's two things going on here. One, we know again that Ohio University has plans for the West Union Street corridor, West Union Street campus, and so when we looked at this, we said, okay, we want to encourage that development, and hopefully that either OU or its partners or developers or whomever comes in here and does some things here to bring a new investment into the city. There are, as you can see there, properties 1 through 5 are largely vacant properties, so there's potential there. 8 and 9 are buildings that are occupied today, but certainly those could use investment. Then the other properties, we put in a couple properties. Those other properties, they're near the Athens Depot, and we could see potentially some investment there as well, just going out into the future. But you can see with all these, really what we're trying to do, and with the DRD, is to encourage investment. Because as I said, 70% of the revenue 70% of the new revenue in each of these areas can go back into the DRD. And that's important. It's 70% of new revenue. Whatever property taxes are generated in those areas today, that stays the same. That's a baseline. That doesn't go away. It doesn't go into the DRDs. It goes to the same places it goes today. Anything over and above that, either through new development, whether it's new buildings, vertical development going up, or whether it's reinvestment in those buildings, or just pure increases because increases in value. 70% of that new goes into the DRD, and we use it for one of those 4 things or 5 things. And we really see, it's a good. I think these are a really good economic development tool, and it's anchored in the historic preservation, which I think is a great thing. I think you all recognize that. You have a town here that's very historic, and you have a lot of buildings already. So I think that's why we looked at these. The other thing I think we're going to mention, we started with these 3. And a lot of it was based on, just to go back, we did a strategic plan for the Athens County Economic Development Council. In that plan, we talked about the West Union Street corridor with the board and with the outside stakeholders. And so we kind of started with these. I think, Mayor, because it was a focus of that plan, part of that plan. But we can do more of these in the city. If there are other opportunities, if there's other places that we see that you want to put a DRD in place, we could do that. Again, it has to be anchored by an historic property or in a historic district, but if we want to encourage development or we want to encourage preservation of buildings, we could do these anywhere else. We're not limited. The legislation says you can put as many of these as you want in a town as you want, as long as they're only 10 acres in area. So, and you're not limited either. If you put these in place 5 years from now, there's somebody that comes along and says, I want to invest in X. And you say, we have this DRD in place, but it's not in the same area. We could put a DRD in that area to take care of that development. So we're not really limited by it. This is really, what I would think is really, this is just to get it kick-started. It's also, you have to do an economic development plan for these. We did that on your behalf, and that's what you see. And I think the value there too is that you can take that economic development plan and use it in the future for any one of those other plans, other DRDs that you do. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I've talked probably for more than 15 minutes, but I'll open it up.
What we'll do is take comments from council members, administration first, if there are any questions. We will open it up to audience members. If you additionally have a question, the only request we'd make is you come up and identify yourself, your name and address, and so we have it for the camera and the records, and then you can ask the question up at the podium. And we do say that we limit the discussion or comments that folks make to 3 minutes when people are making the comments about it. Just an overview, if I'm remembering correctly, this downtown redevelopment district tool is used in about 10 cities around the state right now. So we're talking about Circleville, Portsmouth, Utica, Lancaster, Circleville, among some of the other cities that are using it as a tool. So questions from council members? Yes, Councilmember Fall.
I'll just lead off. Do these have an expiration day?
I should have mentioned that.
Reauthorization sort of process?
Yes. So these, you can do these anywhere between 1 year and 30 years. I think what we talked about is doing it for 10 years. If we do it for 10 years, we have to notify the school district of that. If we go out any further than that, we have to, we have to get their approval. So we thought it would make sense to do it for 10 years, see how it goes, and then if we want, we could reauthorize it after 10.
Right. Well, I've spoken with you on different occasions. I think that this process, and then, there's DODs and DDDs and DIDs and SIDs and all sorts of stuff. And I think that we would need to be careful that we know which one we're talking about so that it doesn't get confused. So we have to be careful of our acronyms. I think that like the other projects that have been proposed, it's a healthy combination for the city of public and private. And OU, which is not, it has a different. And I think that it helps for us to leverage other grants associated with historic preservation. And I think for me, looking at what our comprehensive plan process is showing and some of the ideas that have been coming out, these particular DRDs are really well matched to what is coming out as basic values and vision of what we want our city to become. It's increasing density in our built-up areas, which help with a walkable, bikeable, pedestrian-friendly city, which we are moving towards. It also reduces all sorts of other impacts. And so I think that if they're well-designed, then they have a lot of benefits. And I appreciate the 10-year because this is kind of a model for this area, especially. And maybe we need to take some trip to one of the other ones and looks at how it is after several years out. So, thanks.
I agree, and I'll just make a comment if I might. This program is relatively new, as we talked about. It was put in law in September of 2016. The first one that we did was for the village of Utica. It's a village of 2,300 people. They have yet to receive the money from the DRD, and that's because, as you know, with property taxes, it's a year behind. Theirs was put in place in 17. They collect in 18. They'll see the revenues next year, and that's actually the case with all of them. So I think Utica would be a good place. Circleville is a place that used it for one thing in particular, and that might be somewhere to go talk about. Portsmouth, I'm not sure if they're putting them in place because they've had a change in administration. There are different people that are there, but certainly we can do that, and we have done 10. I believe there's at least one other one in Zanesville that we weren't involved with, and I think there's a couple in Knox County as well that are going. So they're all kind of in different stages. There's several of them that were done in 2017 that might be useful to talk to, but certainly I agree with that.
Great, thank you. It's very encouraging. I'm glad that we're going together on all this. So thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Katsas.
Yes, thank you. And so I guess my question, I know that the mayor for a long time was working on a TIF for the uptown area. Is that still Are you still thinking about that, or is this kind of a continuation of the conversation, and maybe we're starting to think more DRD, or am I just getting ahead of myself in that?
No, again, I think this falls right in line with what Member Fall was saying. There's so many acronyms running around. No, for the Uptown area, we're talking about a special improvement district, a SID, which is different, but not that different. It's interesting how these are they all have their own nuances, whether it's a DRD, a TIF, or a SID. But a SID, you can have overlays to where a SID and a DRD can reside in the same place. That's because they're different. For a SID, it's the property owners who they go through their own process of agreeing that yes, we want to self-impose an annual fee to be part of a SID to create it, and it's for beautification. But a DRD is similar to that, but again, it's different. It's based on property tax. And I want to reiterate something that Mr. Green was saying, and I think this is important, is this is not an increase in one's property taxes. It is not. That's not what this is. But as property taxes, because of redevelopment, because of refurbishing, rehabbing, however you want to look at it, as the property values over time do increase, capturing 70% of that increase after your baseline, as Mr. Green said, that's what we're talking about. So we're not talking about taking anybody's current property tax and going, okay, we're going to slap a new tax on it, it's going to go up. No, it's again, and that's very similar to a TIF. A TIF does the exact same thing, where as the property values go up, a percentage of that property tax increase goes back into the TIF, and the TIF then allows us, as you guys are aware, of the East State Street improvements. The roadway is going to be redone with a portion of it.
Councilmember Fall.
Well, I also think the management of the different programs are different. The SID is property owners, the board of directors for the SID, it's all property owners driven, which is more of the private versus public sort of thing. And this, I think, is much more of the public sort of process, because there will be requirements with planning that goes forward and this sort of stuff. So, thank you.
It is. I'm sorry if I can add. I think it's important the SID versus the DRD is a very important distinction. The Special Improvement District, as the mayor said, does a special assessment. The property owners vote for that. The DRD, you say that we want to put a DRD in place, and it goes in place, and it's not an increase. They don't, unless their property increases because it gets an increase in appraisal, that's the only increase they had. Otherwise, they just pay the taxes as they would. So there are different, the DRD, I think, to Councilmember Fall's point, is controlled by the city as well, and it's public, and those funds come back to you, and you decide how you're going to spend those funds. Okay.
We've got some other council members. Councilmember Butler.
Thank you. Thank you, President Isley. Thank you for the presentation. And I appreciate that you're championing this and communicating this to us. And I apologize for some of my naivety. But if you were to offer, conversely, maybe some of the negatives that we should be cautious about, what would you suggest or say?
Well, I often get asked what the downsides are. I don't know if you're asking that or not, but
thank you.
Yeah. There really are no downsides because this is all based on an increase, whether it's an increase based on new investment in a building, redevelopments of a building, or just, there's a general market raise that increases. So there's really particularly no downside risk to you. There's no negatives from that perspective. It's their property taxes, so there might be negatives there where the increases are not going to the other places. 70% are going into the district. So that's a decision that has to be made by City Council. But those are probably the negatives I would.
Okay. And thank you. My follow-up question, if I may. Thank you. My follow-up question would then be, I know you and the President as well acknowledged a couple of communities that have embraced this. Mm-hmm. Do you have any feel-good stories from any other communities or outside of the state, perhaps, or similarly?
Well, DRDs are just general. I'm joking. The Circleville's an actual good example. Circleville put the DRD in place they have if you're familiar at all with downtown Circleville, just south of downtown is their it was a middle school, but it was originally their high school. The school district there built a brand new complex. and there was a developer that came in that did senior housing on the part that was the building. The other part, the gymnasium, the band rooms, all those kind of things, it had no purpose. I mean, it really didn't. The community owned it, but it needs $1.5 million worth of work. So what the DRD is allowing them to do is give them a flow of funds to be able to rehab that. Now, they're not going to come up with $1.5 million through the DRD, but it'll come up with probably $500,000 to $700,000 over that 10-year period. Then the rest of it they're going to get actually from CDBG and some other things. Now, they're not there yet. They're still, kind of in the process of making that happen. But that's something where they're taking an underutilized asset and using it. Utica, the reason that Utica did it, they had if you've ever been to Utica, that's where Velvet Ice Cream is. It's a stagecoach town. Like you drive through their downtown and you can see that the stagecoach stopped right at the hotel, and you can see the hotel, the balcony or whatever, where they'd stop. That's where it still is. And they had I said he's a developer, but he's a gentleman that is from there, and he had moved back, and he turned an old building into a restaurant, and that was a success. And he looked next door and he said, the place where the stagecoach stopped and where the hotels were, he said, I want to do something with that, but he kind of things were a little bit tight. So the village administrator that looked at this and said, we can use that DRD to help him with that. We can also use it with some improvements to our downtown because they needed beautification improvements. So that's another story, and I think the village administrator there, Glenn Richards would talk about that and how it's helping. The mayor of Circleville, Don McElroy, would be more than happy to talk with you as well, or their administrator there, Terry Frazier. Those are two good stories. I mentioned Portsmouth. We put 4 DRDs in place in Portsmouth. Portsmouth is an interesting community, meaning that you go and you drive into Portsmouth, and I'm sure you've been there at some point. If you would have driven into Portsmouth in 1960 something, I don't care what year you picked, there would have been all these buildings would have still been there, but they would have had activity. And then you fast forward to today, the buildings are still there, but there's nothing there. Shawnee State has a lot more going on there. And now there's student housing that is going on into all those buildings. And that DRD is going to make that happen. That DRD will allow those buildings, and again, it's not going to provide it's not going to provide the most amount of money to those properties to allow them to operate, but what it does is it allows those developers to do it quicker or do it at a better rate than they would otherwise. Because, it takes a lot of money, as you all know. It takes a lot of money to rehab old buildings. It's not cheap.
Thank you for those examples.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Yes, Councilmember Reisner.
2 questions, actually. Will this require any special oversight or accounting procedures for council or the administration to keep track of these?
Yeah, so and we've talked to the city auditor about this. We've had, I think, 2 discussions within the last week or 2. They'll have to set up a DRD fund. They will have to set up a fund for each one of these DRDs. They will, the city auditor, the mayor, and the law director will work with the county auditor and the county treasurer to figure out those flow of funds. And then every year, 2 times a year, those funds will get essentially deposited into those DRD funds, and then they will work with you to figure out where those go. Now, we also recommend putting what we call a DRD operating committee in place, which is made up of some of those same officials, but then also people that work in the DRD areas or that own buildings. And that's another I would just call it a advisory committee to make recommendations to you for where that money goes. So that's kind of technically that's how the money flows and how the auditor would have to work with you on those funds.
My second question then is, as these revenues come in, if at that point we do not have a particular project for X number of dollars to go to, can those funds then be deposited, say, as our treasurer normally would do with surplus funds? So
for the 10 years that it's in place, they have to remain in the DRD. They can roll over from year to year. At the end of the 10 years, if there's money left over, they can go back into your general fund.
Well, I'm not really talking about the general fund. What I'm talking about is if the revenues are coming in and we put them in some line, we keep an account of it. But we also have situations where we have surplus funds. Those get invested in our local bank and CDs and that sort of thing. I'm wondering if these funds could also
if they're sitting
be
there?
parked there until an appropriate project or investment comes along where those funds will be used. I mean, or are there any restrictions for that?
You know, Mayor, you may be able to answer that. That's more of a city finance question.
Well, I don't know that we're authorized to do that with TIF monies as they come in. Typically, we save them and bank it, and it rolls year to year. I might lean on the auditor on this one, but I think that funding that is currently in our TIF has not been used for quite some time for East State Street within its own boundary, but I don't know that we can reinvest TIF. I'm going to ask, the city auditor to chime in on this one. This is a question I've never thought about, quite honestly.
Yes, you did. I'm the guy you talked to several times. I'm Nate.
Okay, how our money flows is the money all comes in, and while we track all our money in these different funds, our money is basically in a couple banks. So we don't have a different bank account for every fund that we have. So we do have surplus money, and it does get invested by the treasurer. This is part of our division of duties. And so what happens, and this happened recently, is we have money sitting there for the pool. As you know, we borrowed $7 million, got the money, we're paying it back on an amortization schedule. So we have all that money sitting there that has been invested, but we needed some of that. We contact the treasurer, and she makes a transfer, whether it's a CD or wherever, a special account like Star Ohio, makes that transfer so that we have cash that we need. So all of our money works that way.
Okay. So there's absolutely no difference between these funds and any other source of revenue.
So we pay attention on a daily basis how much money we have in our savings account, our working account, and of course we have money coming in all the time. So in our exchange account, we put that in our savings account and all that kind of stuff. So that's not really separated, and that money would be available for investment. Then when we get interest every month, that interest is divided to each of those funds depending on how much money they have sitting there by percentage.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, Councilmember McGee.
Thank you, President Isley. Mr. Green, my understanding is that the money cannot be used for a 100% residential project according to the sheet. Does that mean if a particular building is being used for apartments, for instance, it cannot be used for that? And just to qualify something, is if a property owner is a member of this area and wants to then build apartments, does that mean then if he's in this area, he or she is in this area, or it is in this area, that that they would then have 70% of the increase in value and all that property set aside and basically just taxed for that area? I mean, that's basically what you're saying.
Right, that's correct.
Okay.
I think, yeah. I mean, if they, let's say they create $1 million in value, 70% of that property tax goes into the DRD. Does that make sense?
It does. It seems, if I might just add, it seems like we've just come out of that, something like that with a station project to renovate the station project. And I believe that's almost completed with the taxes currently.
Yeah, that was an income tax abatement for the...
A similar concept, though, for residential properties, I believe.
So the answer to your question about the residential, your first question, these DRDs, what the restriction is that they can't be used in a DRD that's 100% residential. So if you had a housing development in town
Right.
that were single family homes, or if it was an apartment building that was a 10-acre apartment building, which would be a massive apartment building, but we couldn't create a DRD and use it to exist for that. If the DRD, which all these are mixed use, then yes, potentially we can use the DRD revenues to go back into that building, even if it's mostly residential.
So potentially it could be used for rehab of older housing stock made into mixed use with maybe a business on the ground if it's in that area, but also maybe making some affordable housing available. Those sort of things where it's mixed use, and you're doing those sort of things, maybe giving a grant to look at whether you could do it, or providing for low-income loans to do some of it too.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
we've talked about briefly at some of the meetings too. So, which is right on. You know.
Any other questions or comments from council members? I do have one question, and I know the Economic Development Council is comprised of the city, the county, and the university, correct, as the major members of that. And so part of this area on West Union does involve the university areas, and there's reference made to the university being tax exempt, but then references redevelopment charges. So I wonder if you might give a brief explanation of that.
Sure. They're a little bit complicated, but their work, and I know I'm gonna cross-reference some different acronyms, but they work similar actually to a special improvement district. Redevelopment charges, so the DRD itself, as its essence, as we've talked about, is the increase in property taxes in these DRDs. 70% of that goes into the DRD, and it's used for those revenues. On a voluntary basis, meaning if the property owner chooses to do so, they can put a redevelopment charge on their property. It's called a redevelopment charge, but it works like a special assessment, which works exactly like a special improvement district. Okay. So again, it mentions in here Ohio University, but let's say that they wanted to that in the Athens the depot, the Athens depot DRD, we wanted to do some infrastructure improvements, and the university and the other property owner said, "Yep, you know what? We'll pay for those infrastructure sidewalk improvements through the DRD." We'd have to figure out what that means and how much it costs per owner, but they could voluntarily say, "Yes, we will agree with we will enter an agreement with the city to have the auditor collect the county auditor collect that redevelopment charge or special assessment, and those funds will go directly to those improvements that are set aside for the redevelopment charge." I know it's a little complicated, but you would essentially, what would happen is the city would enter into an agreement with those property owners that says we will charge $10 per 1,000 linear feet. That doesn't actually, the math doesn't work out, but let's just say that $10 for every 1,000 linear feet of your property, and at the end of the day we collect $100. That $100 every year goes to pay for those sidewalks. That's how that would work, and that's over and above any revenues that are generated just through property taxes. Now that is, again, that would be considered a voluntary tax increase, because those property owners agree that they're going to allow the county auditor to collect more than what they would in property taxes. But they also, because of an agreement with the city, agree where those funds are going to go. It works like a special improvement district, a SID, but it's a little bit different because you could do individual properties. It's very difficult to do that under a SID. Under a redevelopment charge, you could do one property and say, we're going to charge a redevelopment charge on that one property.
Okay. And I would like to allow, we've got about 12 minutes left before our regular council meeting starts, so I'd like to see if there are any other, one comment from the mayor, and then we're going to open it up to the audience to see if they have any questions or comments that they'd like to make.
And I'll be very brief. Our city planner, our current city engineer, and I are also exploring other possible DRDs in the uptown area, primarily the north end of Court Street and possibly down Stimson Avenue. So we're looking at this as a valuable tool for some other levels of redevelopment, as opposed to going back to a traditional TIF and using that. Again, using this as opposed to a TIF gives us a lot more flexibility for what the dollars can be spent.
And is there anybody else that would like to ask any questions or comments? Yes, Auditor Hecht, if you want to come on up, please.
I probably should have asked this last week, but we had a lot of other discussions about the ordinance. My question has to do with the school payments. In our TIF ordinance, it is spelled out, the split, and the city pays the schools directly for their share of the TIF. I don't believe that's spelled out in our ordinance, and is that going to be handled differently?
So, it is, because you will not have, you won't make a payment to the schools. In this case, let's just say $100 gets collected. You get $70 from the county treasurer. The other $30 gets split by the schools and the other entities, and you don't have to make that. The county treasurer makes those payments.
Okay.
That's the difference.
Any other comments or questions? So what we're doing tonight is the public hearing in anticipation of consideration of an ordinance for City Council to consider approving these redevelopment districts. And we've seen them defined on the maps, and wanting to thank you and Ashley both for coming here tonight and presenting to us. There may be some other follow-up questions. But one last call for any other questions from the audience or any other comments? Okay. Diane, did you have one? If you could just tell us your name so the audience knows, the TV audience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Diane McVeigh. My husband and I own a property on West Union. I'm curious if you've done any numbers in terms of what you think this will, say, in 5 years be bringing forward for the city to use. And then I'd like a little more clarity on what you're calling the redevelopment charges on parcels, and whether or not any preliminary discussions have happened with Ohio University.
Okay. The answer to your first question about revenue generation, we actually, and I'm looking in here, if you look on page 21 of the, I think you all have this plan. I don't know if you all have that or not, but council members do. When I switch. Well, I was going to use that, but I'm not sure if it's entirely accurate. I need to, so this says over 30 years, and we're going to do these over 10 years. But if you
Divide it by 3.
If you look over, so for every, if you have $1 million in new investment, it could generate essentially $15,000 a year in DRD revenue. That's kind of the formula. So what we looked at, if there's some potential for investment in these, and I think we put some of that in the report. But that's generally what we look at. Every $1 million, there's $15,000 available in DRD revenue.
And that projected new revenue, are you looking at the types of sources that it might come from? Because so much of this property is not producing any property taxes. So.
Sure, we did some projections on, and I apologize. I thought that we had them in there, but we do, and we'll actually we have that. That will be in the plan. So when you see the final plan and then the ordinance, that's in there because it's all part of the DFD. So I apologize for that. Your questions about the redevelopment charge. We have had discussions with Ohio University, but not particularly about the redevelopment charge. That is, a recognition. A lot of those are tax-exempt properties, and we'd have to figure out if they'd want to do that, or if it would even be of value to them.
It looks like we have one more question. We've got just a couple of minutes of time here. Yes.
Just a basic question. I notice your company itself is a private LLC. I just wondered, how do you get paid from this process?
We got the Athens County Economic Development Council paid us a flat rate to do these DRDs and the Nelsonville DRDs. We got paid $30,000 to do that. So we're doing these 3. I think we're going to do 1 or 2 in Nelsonville. So that was, and we got paid for that to do the plan, the parcel analysis, that financial analysis, and then helping you through the legislation, helping the administration through the legislation. So that's how we get paid.
You have one more question?
Yes, I noticed when you described your group, you indicated that you also do planning, marketing, and incentive for consulting services,
Sure.
et cetera. Do you have any input in actually bringing investment then into this area? And,
I do.
okay, and that 30,000, that doesn't cover that, I take it, there's a separate fee?
It doesn't.
Okay.
But-
What would
But,
that
as you know, the mayor and I've known the mayor for probably 3 years now. We've been working through that plan. I know Sarah and Ashley really well. We love working here, to be honest with you. So we are out talking to our clients. We have developer clients that we'd like to bring here to help to invest in Athens, truly. So that's not included in that fee, but we're certainly talking with our clients and others about what's going on here. And you've got a lot of great things going on here. Certainly you have a beautiful downtown. You have the university being here plays a role in that. And I think there's more opportunities. And we have clients, but we also have just other developers that we'd like to introduce to the community to help.
And certainly a responsibility of the community at large, too. I think it's what your report refers to as the multiplier effect of going out into other communities, other states adjacent to us, and talking about our community and what we have to offer, particularly if we move forward with the redevelopment.
I talk about it all the time, whether I'm allowed to or not.
We have about 2 minutes. Yes, Mayor.
I'll be less than that.
Okay.
And to kind of follow on with your question, Member McGee, that's a good question. It was budgeted for out of the Athens County Economic Development Council. We were, purposeful in thinking this through. And also, we vetted 2 other firms, much like the Montrose Group, so it wasn't a singular process. We went through extensive interviews. Yep. And we believe that we've selected the best group. So that's why Nate is standing before you as we speak.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank the audience for attending. Make sure you've signed in on the attendance. There's a sign-in sheet, a clipboard rotating around, so we have a record for our public service meeting. It's up on the mayor's desk right now. And we will adjourn at 6:56, and then we will reconvene with another public hearing for the Community Development Block Grants at 7 p.m. So thank you very much.